The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the streets of Seattle slick and shining as though the entire city had been scrubbed clean overnight. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the car window and watched the droplets race each other down the glass, twisting and breaking apart before vanishing into the blur of asphalt rushing beneath us.
18.
Today was supposed to feel different. People always said that when you turned 18, something shifted, that suddenly, you were an adult with a whole world of choices ahead of you. But as I sat in the passenger seat of my father's car, watching the city recede in the rearview mirror, I didn't feel different at all. I felt the same knot of unease that had been living in my stomach for years, the one that had only tightened after Mom died. "Your turn," Dad Michael said, sliding the folded map toward me across the console. His voice carried that forced cheer I'd grown used to. "Navigator's job is the most important one on a trip, you know." I gave him a side glance. His dark hair, now streaked heavily with gray, looked messier than usual, and the lines etched into his forehead seemed deeper in the pale morning light. His hands gripped the steering wheel at 10, and too like he was taking a driving test. It had been 2 years since Claire, my mom, passed away, and in all that time, Michael had never really loosened his grip on anything. Not on conversations, not on emotions, not on me. I opened the map and let it spread across my lap. "South," I murmured, tracing the bold red line of Interstate 5 with my finger. "Straight shot until we get close to San Francisco. That's about, 12 hours? "Give or take," he said, shrugging one shoulder. "We'll stop for food, stretch our legs. No rush." He tried to sound casual, but there was a tension humming beneath his words. This whole trip had felt unusual from the start. My dad was not the road trip type. He was the type who planned things down to the minute, who frowned at detours, who hated surprises. And yet, 2 weeks ago, he had placed the car keys and a folded map in front of me at breakfast and asked if I wanted to spend my birthday driving down the coast with him. Something about the way he'd asked, eyes flicking away like he couldn't quite look me in the face, had made me say yes. Part of me had hoped maybe this was his way of reconnecting, of finally being present. Maybe he was trying to make up for the years of distance and the gaping silence Mom's absence had left behind. The first hour passed quietly, the hum of the tires against the wet road filling the silence. He tried a few times to start conversations about my favorite songs, about places we might stop, even about a silly memory of Mom insisting on singing along to old country songs on another trip years ago. At first it was nice. Painful, yes, but comforting too. But as the miles slipped by, his mood shifted. His stories turned heavier. He kept circling back to regrets, to apologies for how he'd handled things when I was younger, for not being the father he should have been. I brushed it off, trying to keep the tone light. "You don't have to make this into some therapy session, Dad," I'd said, half joking. But the way his jaw tightened told me he didn't find it funny. By the time the sun broke through the clouds and the highway opened into a stretch of green fields, a kind of silence had settled over us, not the comfortable kind, but the fragile kind that cracked at the edges. We stopped for lunch at a diner just past Portland. The place smelled like burnt coffee and syrup, and the booths were upholstered in faded red vinyl. I ordered pancakes because the sight of them stacked high on the menu made me feel like a kid again. Michael ordered black coffee and a BLT, but barely touched it. He kept glancing at me over the rim of his mug like he wanted to say something but couldn't. His eyes carried that same weight they'd had for years, something unsaid pressing against the edges. "You okay?" I asked finally, my fork poised halfway to my mouth. "Yeah," he said too quickly. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Just tired. Long drive, that's all." I didn't believe him. Not for a second. When we got back on the road, the silence between us grew heavier. The radio played oldies, songs I knew only because Mom used to hum them while cooking dinner. Every note scraped against the hollow inside me where her presence used to live. I caught Dad glancing at me in the reflection of the side window, his eyes shadowed. By the time evening fell and the horizon glowed pink behind the mountains, we pulled into a small roadside motel. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, advertising clean rooms and cable TV. Inside, the room was small and plain, A single bedspread patterned with faded flowers, a heater clinking in the corner, the faint smell of stale cigarettes lingering in the curtains. I kicked off my shoes and sat at the edge of the bed, watching as Michael draped his jacket over the back of the chair. The silence was thick, broken only by the whir of the heater. "Dad," I said finally, my voice softer now. "Why do I feel like there's something you're not telling me?" He froze, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, shoulders sagging. "It's not the right time, Elena," he said quietly. "We'll talk when we get to San Francisco." "Why not now?" I pressed. "We're here. Just us. If there's something you need to say, say it." He rubbed his hands over his face and sat heavily in the chair. His eyes looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. "It's complicated," he said at last. "I've made mistakes, Elena. Big ones. Things I regret. Things I can't change." My chest tightened. "You've been trying," I said quickly. "I mean, things haven't been perfect, but I see you trying. Why are you being so hard on yourself?" He let out a bitter laugh, hollow and sharp. "Trying isn't enough. Not after everything. I wish I could go back. Do things differently. But I can't. And I don't want you to think I didn't love you. Because I did. Your mom and I both did." The rawness in his voice stunned me. I sat back, not sure what to say. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, offering a sad smile. "Just know this. Everything I've done on this trip, everything I'm going to tell you, it's because I want to make things right." That night, as his breathing grew steady and sleep pulled him under, I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. My mind drifted back to childhood. I remembered his voice raised in anger over spilled milk, over grades that weren't high enough. I remembered shrinking under the weight of his disappointment. But I also remembered Mom, Claire, her gentle hands smoothing my hair, her soft voice telling me I was enough. She had been my anchor, my safe place. Losing her had been like losing the sun. Nothing since had been as warm or bright. The motel heater rattled on, and eventually exhaustion pulled me into uneasy sleep. I woke the next morning to find Michael sitting by the window, staring out at the parking lot. His shoulders slumped, his profile etched with shadows in the pale morning light. When he noticed I was awake, he forced a small smile. "Morning, birthday girl." 18. "That's a big one, huh?" "Feels the same so far," I muttered, stretching. He chuckled softly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, maybe this will help." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. The edges were worn, like he'd handled it too many times. He handed it to me, his hand lingering before he let go. "Your gift," he said. His tone was lighter than his expression. "Something important." I frowned, turning the envelope over in my hands. "What is it?" "Not yet," he said quickly. His voice dropped, quieter now. "Don't open it yet. Keep it sealed until we get to San Francisco." "Why?" He hesitated, searching for words. Because that's how your mom wanted it. And I promised her." The mention of Mom tightened something in my chest. "Promise me, Elena," he added, his eyes meeting mine with a rare intensity. "Promise me you won't open it until then." I tucked the envelope into my bag, the weight of it somehow heavier than it should have been. "Okay, I promise." Relief softened his face, if only a little. He stood, clapping his hands together with forced cheer. "Good. Now, let's hit the road. Birthday breakfast is on me." We found a diner down the road, its walls covered in faded photographs of fishing boats and long-forgotten tourists. Michael ordered me pancakes again, stacking them high with whipped cream and sticking a candle right in the middle. "Can't have a birthday without cake," he said, grinning. His voice wavered just enough for me to notice. I smiled back, trying to match his energy, but the envelope in my bag felt like it was burning a hole through the floor beneath me. We were back on the road before noon, the sun high and blinding above the endless stretch of highway. Michael kept pointing out landmarks, playing a mix of old songs on the radio, but I could see the tension coiling tighter in his jaw every time our eyes met. The closer we got to California, the more I felt it too, the sense that something was coming. Something he was carrying that I wasn't ready for. By the time we crossed the state line, my birthday felt less like a celebration and more like a countdown. The highway unfurled before us like an endless gray ribbon, stretching south toward a horizon we could never quite catch. By late morning the sun was high, painting everything in a haze of light that made the world look sharper and yet somehow distant, as if I were watching my own life through a window. Michael drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, humming under his breath to a song on the radio that I didn't recognize. Every so often he glanced at me, and every time I caught him, he looked away just as quickly. The envelope sat in my bag at my feet, heavy with unspoken promises. It was just a slip of paper, sealed shut, but it felt like more than that. It felt like a fuse, waiting for the match. We stopped at a gas station just past Reading. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The paint on the pumps was peeling, and a tired golden retriever slept in the shade of a vending machine that buzzed louder than the cicadas. I stretched my legs while Michael filled the tank. The air was hot and dry, dust clinging to my sneakers. When I went inside to buy a bottle of water, the woman at the counter smiled and asked if we were heading home or running away. The question startled me. I muttered something vague about a birthday trip, and her smile deepened with that knowing look older strangers often give when they think they've spotted something in you that you don't even see in yourself. Back in the car, I handed Dad a bottle of water. His hands were steady as he twisted the cap, but his knuckles were pale. "You're quiet," I said after a while. He gave a non-committal grunt. "Just thinking." "About what?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His throat worked like he was swallowing words he didn't want me to hear. Finally, he just said, "About your mom. About things I should have done differently." The word "should've" hung heavy between us. That night, we stayed in another roadside motel. This one was cleaner, the kind of place families stopped at on their way to somewhere better. The walls were thin, and I could hear the muffled laughter of children in the room next door, their voices spilling through the plaster like ghosts of a life I once had. After we ate greasy takeout on the bedspread, Michael sat in the corner by the lamp, flipping through a battered paperback he'd pulled from his bag. He wasn't reading, though. I could tell by the way his eyes stayed fixed on the same page for minutes at a time. Finally, I set down my half-empty soda and broke the silence. "Dad, can I ask you something?" His eyes lifted, wary. "Of course. Why now?" I hesitated, twisting the tab of the soda can. "Why this trip? It feels like you're building up to something." He closed the book, setting it on the table beside him. For a long moment, he just studied me, his gaze heavy and unreadable. "When your mom and I talked about the future," he said slowly, "we always imagined doing things differently than our parents did. She wanted to make sure you grew up knowing how loved you were. And he stopped, his jaw clenching. I didn't always live up to that. I thought of the shouting over small mistakes, the slammed doors, the way I'd sometimes felt invisible unless I'd done something wrong. My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. "You know," he went on, "your mom, she wanted to tell you something earlier. She thought honesty was always better, even if it hurt. But He shook his head, eyes falling to the floor. "I wasn't ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. He looked up, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might tell me. His mouth opened, the words trembling on the edge. But then he closed it again and rubbed a hand over his face. "When we get to San Francisco," he said finally. "Not before." The firmness in his tone left no room for argument, but my stomach twisted all the same. That night, I couldn't sleep. The motel bed was lumpy, the sheets scratchy, but it wasn't that. It was the silence in the room, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on me. Michael's breathing was steady from the other bed, but even in sleep he seemed tense, his body curled inward like he was bracing for a blow. I stared at the ceiling and let my mind wander back to memories of Claire. Mom had always known how to make me feel safe. When I was 7 and failed a spelling test, she had sat me on her lap and told me one test didn't define me. When I was 10 and scraped my knee on the sidewalk, she'd patched it up with a joke and a kiss. She never raised her voice, never made me feel small. Michael had been different. Not cruel, not always, but distant. His anger came quick, like sparks from dry wood. I remembered the way he'd scolded me over spilled milk, the disappointment in his eyes when I brought home a B on a math test. I used to wonder if something about me just wasn't enough. But Mom always made me feel like I was. Losing her had been like losing the only compass I had. As I drifted between memory and the present, I thought about the envelope tucked in my bag. What secret could possibly be inside? What truth had Mom wanted me to know at 18? The question followed me into uneasy dreams, where shadows whispered things I couldn't quite hear. The next morning, I woke to find Michael sitting by the window again, staring out at the parking lot like it held answers. His eyes were shadowed, his expression unreadable. When I stirred, he smiled faintly. "Morning. We've got a long drive today." As I drifted between memory and the present, I thought about the envelope tucked in my bag. What secret could possibly be inside? What truth had Mom wanted me to know at 18? The question followed me into uneasy dreams, where shadows whispered things I couldn't quite hear. The next morning, I woke to find Michael sitting by the window again, staring out at the parking lot like it held answers. His eyes were shadowed, his expression unreadable. When I stirred, he smiled faintly. "Morning. We've got a long drive today." Over breakfast, burnt toast and watery coffee from the motel lobby, he tried to act cheerful, but I could see through it. Every word he spoke seemed weighed down by the things he wasn't saying. As we loaded our bags into the car, he paused with his hand on the trunk, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse under the weight of it all. Then he straightened, forcing another smile. Over breakfast, burnt toast and watery coffee from the motel lobby, he tried to act cheerful, but I could see through it. Every word he spoke seemed weighed down by the things he wasn't saying. As we loaded our bags into the car, he paused with his hand on the trunk, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse under the weight of it all. Then he straightened, forcing another smile. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready for anything anymore. The drive that day felt different. The landscape shifted from pine forests to golden fields, the sun beating down relentlessly. We passed towns where the streets looked frozen in time, diners with peeling paint, motels with neon signs that hummed in the daylight. Michael kept the radio low, old songs blending into the hum of the tires. Sometimes he pointed out landmarks, a bridge, a stretch of coastline, a line of wind turbines spinning in the distance, but his voice was flat, absent. By mid-afternoon, the silence had settled so deeply it felt like a third passenger in the car. I couldn't stand it anymore. "Dad," I said, louder than I meant to. He startled slightly, glancing at me. "Yeah, you said Mom wanted to tell me something. What was it?" His grip tightened on the wheel. "Elena, I'm not a kid anymore," I pressed. "I can handle it." His jaw worked, muscles tight. Finally, he said, "It's not about whether you can handle it. It's about whether I can." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, stunned, as the road blurred beneath us. For once, he didn't backtrack or soften it. He just kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white against the wheel. That night, we stayed in another motel on the outskirts of a small town. This one was quieter, the air heavy with the scent of pine and the distant sound of crickets. After dinner, sandwiches from a gas station, we sat outside on the balcony, watching the last light fade from the sky. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the chirp of insects and the occasional rumble of a passing truck. Finally, Michael spoke. His voice was low, rough. "When your mom died, I didn't know how to be what you needed. I didn't know how to fix things. She always knew how to make everything better. I never did." I turned to him, the ache in his words pulling at something in me. "You tried," I said softly. "Trying isn't enough," he muttered. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I should have told you sooner. About everything. But I was a coward." The word cut through me. Coward about what? I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark horizon, his shoulders hunched, as though the weight of the past were pressing him into the earth. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "When we get to San Francisco, I promise." That night, I lay awake again, staring at the stars through the thin motel curtains. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts tangled. Whatever secret he was carrying, it was big enough to change everything. I could feel it in my bones. And the closer we got to San Francisco, the closer I came to learning the truth I wasn't sure I wanted. The Golden Gate Bridge rose ahead of us like something out of a dream, its towers burning red against the fog that clung to the bay. After days of endless highway, of motels with flickering neon signs and gas station meals, the sight of San Francisco felt almost unreal, like stepping into another world. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel as we drove across. He didn't say anything, but I could see the tension in the lines of his jaw, the way his eyes darted toward me as though checking to see if I was ready. I wasn't. I told myself over and over that I wanted the truth, that I was ready for whatever it was he'd been holding back. But as the city opened up around us, hills stacked with houses painted every color imaginable, streets so steep they looked like they could tip you into the ocean, I felt a tremor of fear in my chest. What if the truth changed everything? We found a motel near the edge of the city, nothing fancy, just another place with thin walls and threadbare carpets, but Michael seemed more restless than usual. He paced the small room, running a hand through his graying hair, checking his watch though we had no plans. "Dad," I said finally, setting my bag down on the bed. "We're here. You promised." His shoulders stiffened. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned toward me. "Elena," he said, my name heavy in his mouth. "There's something you need to know. Something your mom wanted you to hear when you turned 18. That's why I brought you here." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" He crossed the room and sat heavily in the chair by the window. The city lights spilled across his face, making the lines around his eyes seem deeper. "You remember how your mom always said honesty mattered more than anything?" he began. I nodded, my throat tight. "She wanted you to know the truth. About who you are. About where you came from." He paused, swallowing hard. "Elena, you're adopted." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room seemed to tilt, the floor falling out from under me. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not. It's true," he said, his voice breaking. "Claire and we wanted a child so badly. We tried for years. And when it didn't happen, we adopted you. You were a baby. So small. The moment we held you, you were ours. You were hers." My hands shook. I pressed them to my knees, trying to ground myself, but the world wouldn't stop spinning. "You lied to me," I said, my voice rising. "All these years, you let me believe." "We didn't want to lie," he said quickly, his eyes desperate. "We wanted to tell you. Claire wanted to tell you sooner. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at us differently. Afraid you'd stop being mine." Anger flared hot in my chest, mixing with grief and confusion until I could barely separate them. "Stop being yours? You were my dad. She was my mom. That doesn't change because of biology." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But I didn't trust that. I didn't trust myself. And then Claire got sick and his voice cracked, his eyes glistening. "I promised her I'd tell you on your 18th birthday. She made me swear. She didn't want you to find out by accident. She wanted you to hear it from us, from me." The envelope. My heart lurched as I remembered it, sealed and waiting in my bag. My fingers itched to tear it open, to see her words in her own handwriting. "She wrote you a letter," Michael said, as if reading my mind. "That's what's in the envelope. She wanted you to hear it from her too." I grabbed my bag and pulled the envelope out. My name was written across it in her looping script, familiar, beloved, like a ghost reaching out from the past. For a long time, I just stared at it. My hands trembled. "Read it when you're ready," Michael said softly. "Not before." But I couldn't wait. I tore the flap open, my chest tight, and unfolded the paper inside. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, it means you've turned 18. It also means I'm no longer there to tell you these words myself. And oh, how I wish I could be. There's something you need to know. Something I wanted you to hear not as a secret, but as the truth of who you are. You are not our biological daughter. We adopted you when you were only a few weeks old. From the very first moment I held you, you were my child. Nothing could ever change that. Not blood, not DNA, not circumstance. You were mine. You will always be mine. I know this might feel like a betrayal, like we kept something from you. But please understand, we only ever wanted to protect you. Your father struggled with when and how to tell you. He loved you so fiercely that he was afraid of losing you. I tried to convince him otherwise, but in the end, I let it go because I knew the truth would come to you when the time was right. What matters most is this: you are loved. More than words can hold. More than life itself. You filled our lives with joy. You gave us purpose. And nothing can take that away. If you choose to search for your roots one day, I will not blame you. You deserve to know where you came from. But please remember, you came from us too. From our love, from our hopes, from the life we built together. And always you came from me, my heart, my soul, my forever daughter. Love always. Mom. By the time I finished, my vision was blurred with tears. The paper trembled in my hands. I pressed it to my chest, as though I could pull her voice back into me, as though I could make her real again. Michael was crying too, silent tears streaking his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you. I wiped at my eyes, anger and grief still burning inside me, but softer now, tangled with love. You should have, I said, my voice breaking. But she forgave you. And maybe I can too. We sat there in the small motel room, the city alive outside the window, holding the truth between us like something fragile. For the first time in years, it felt like the distance between us had cracked, not gone, not healed, but breaking open enough for light to seep through. That night, I lay awake clutching the letter. The words replayed in my mind over and over, my forever daughter. And though the ground beneath me had shifted, though the truth had shaken everything I thought I knew, one thing remained unbroken. I was hers. Always. The city was awake before I was. Outside the thin motel curtains, horns blared, voices called, and the hum of traffic never stopped. But inside, everything felt muted, as if the letter I had clutched to my chest overnight had built an invisible wall between the world and me. I lay still, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the words echoing again and again, my forever daughter. Michael sat in the chair by the window, his posture slouched, his eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. He looked older than he ever had, fragile almost. When he noticed me watching, he forced a smile. Morning. I nodded, my throat tight. We didn't talk much as we checked out of the motel and stepped into the bright, noisy streets. The city was alive, bursting with movement, but we walked in silence, like two ghosts wandering through a world too fast for us. By noon, we found ourselves at a cafe tucked on a corner of a steep street. The place was quiet, with old wooden chairs and the smell of coffee beans lingering in the air. We sat by the window, sunlight spilling across the table. Michael stirred his coffee without drinking it. Finally, he said, "You're angry with me. You have every right to be." I looked at him, at the man who had raised me, who had failed me and loved me in equal measure. My chest tightened. I'm angry, I admitted, but I'm also lost. I don't know who I am anymore. He flinched, his hand tightening around the spoon. You're my daughter. You're Claire's daughter. That hasn't changed, but it has, I whispered. It changes everything. The silence stretched between us, heavy with truth neither of us wanted to face. Finally, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table toward me. What's this? I asked. Information, he said softly. About where you came from. About your biological parents. My heart lurched. I stared at the paper but didn't touch it. Claire wanted you to have it if you ever asked, he continued. I wasn't sure I should give it to you now, but maybe it's time. I hesitated, the weight of choice pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to rip it open, to know everything, to fill the hollow space the truth had carved into me. But another part, the louder part, was terrified. What if knowing only made me feel more lost? I pushed the paper back toward him. Not yet. His eyes widened. Are you sure? Yes, I said firmly. Right now, I don't need to know where I came from. I need to figure out who I am. Relief washed over his face, though it was laced with guilt. He tucked the paper away and nodded. That afternoon, we drove to the coast. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, gray and shimmering, waves crashing against the rocks like the heartbeat of the earth itself. We sat on a weathered bench overlooking the water. The wind whipped through my hair, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was different, open like the ocean itself. Finally, I turned to him. You weren't perfect. He let out a humorless laugh. That's putting it kindly, but you tried, I said. Even when you messed up, even when you didn't know how, you tried. And maybe that's enough. His eyes glistened, his jaw trembling. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said softly. But Mom wanted me to forgive you. And I think I want to try. Tears slipped down his cheeks. He reached for my hand, hesitated, then let it rest on the bench between us. Close, but not touching. I understood. The bridge between us was fragile, still being rebuilt. But it was there. That night, back in the motel, I took out Mom's letter again. I read it slowly, savoring every word, every curve of her handwriting. And for the first time since she'd died, I felt her with me, not as a ghost haunting the edges of memory, but as something alive inside me. Her love hadn't vanished. It was stitched into me, into who I was. Adopted or not, I was hers. The next morning, we packed the car and began the long drive home. The road stretched before us, the same as before, but I felt different. Not healed, not yet, but steadier. Stronger. Michael turned on the radio, and when an old song came on, one Mom used to hum while cooking, I didn't flinch this time. Instead, I let the melody wash over me. He glanced at me, nervous, but I smiled faintly. And in that small moment, something shifted. The knot that had lived in my stomach for years loosened, just a little. The journey wasn't over. The truth had changed me, but it hadn't broken me. Because I still had her. Because I still had him. Because love, no matter how fragile, no matter how flawed, was still love. And that was enough.